So I'm very excited to do this book publishing event. We did it last year and we also broke records. My guests are Susan Shapiro. Do you want to raise your hand? And Susan Shapiro is a best-selling author or co-author of many books that her family hates, like 5 Men Who Broke My Heart, Lighting Up, Forgiveness Tour, Unhooked, and American Shield. She uses her writing guides, the Book Bible and Byline Bible, to teach her popular Instant Gratification Takes Too Long. Okay. And she teaches these courses at the New York New School, NYU, Columbia University, and private classes and seminars, which are now online. You can follow her on Instagram, and her is that correct? At Professor Sue123 at gmail.com.
Prof Sue123.
At Prof123, and her email is profsue123 at gmail.com. My other guest is a literary agent, Samantha Wekstein, who has a BA from the University of Maryland. She began her career in 2013 at Writers House, and she works for Thompson Literary Agency, where she sells young adult, middle grade picture books, adult fiction, memoir, self-help, sci-fi, and fantasy. Her clients include Lainey Forbes, Corey Lear, Jesse Starr, Keenan Trebanovic, Orlando Mendiola, and Susan. And she lives in Westchester with a husband and dog, and she's also going to be soon on maternity leave.
Yeah.
So I'm happy that you're doing this. You talked about coming early, you may have to go early. I was supposed to go away. My daughter said, "Was pregnant." She said, "You're not going anywhere." I said, "You're not due for a month." She said, "Well, what if I'm early?" And she was 2.5 weeks early. So anyways, welcome. So Sue, I'm going to start with you. How do people learn how to get published?
They take my class, David, as you know. Anyway, happy New Year. Great to be here. Truthfully, it took me so long to figure it out. And I had an undergraduate degree from University of Michigan, a graduate degree in creative writing from NYU. I worked at the New Yorker, and it still took me like 12 years to figure out, who do you try at a newspaper? Who do you try at a magazine? What should I send them? Do I pitch them? Do I write a whole piece? How do I get it to them? How do you know the editor's name? What do they pay? Do they want fiction? Do they want nonfiction? It took me so many years, and I was so frustrated that every time I would ask my teachers, and I love my classes. I love both undergrad, graduate. I took all kinds of classes. Nobody would give you this information, and it made me nuts. And it took me so long to figure out that when the new school wound up asking me in the 90s if I wanted to teach for them, I said, I spent thousands of dollars on 2 degrees and decades writing, and nobody ever taught me, how to send out any work. So I don't want to do your average fiction 101, nonfiction 101, journalism 101. I'm like, I want to do a class that teaches you everything that I wanted to know that nobody taught me. And I said, can I do that? And I even have a name for it. I want to call it the Instant Gratification Takes Too Long method of writing. So I said, will you let me try that? They're like, we're the new school, do whatever the fuck you want. They didn't care. So I'm like, okay, let me try it. And I tried it, and it was so exciting. And I brought in editors from all the newspapers and magazines, and they gave me stipends. And my first class had 12 students, 8 got published, 4 got $1,000 or more. So I had this new rule, which is if anybody in my class publishes a piece for $1,000 or more, I get dinner. And I've been doing it decades. I've been doing it ever since. And it just works. And I even, because I'm based in New York, and I wasn't doing online at first, so I have a book, Byline Bible, get published in 5 weeks, which is exactly how I teach my classes, what editors want. And I have Book Bible that Sam helped me sell, which is Byline Bible is how to sell newspaper magazine. Book Bible is how to sell a book. And it's just, there is a way to do it. It's just nobody teaches it.
Okay, so I want to ask Samantha a question. Susan suggested this question. I'm not quite sure. You list what you're looking for on manuscript wish list. I don't know what that is. And then, is that the best way to get an agent? So what's the manuscript wish list?
Manuscript wish list is just well, it's two things. My manuscript wish list is everything that I'm looking for, and I get really specific. You know, what within each age category and genre I'm looking for. And then there's also a website called Manuscript Wish List, which has a lot of agents and editors on there, and it's a really good resource if you're looking for who to pitch to. That's a really good place to start. In terms of what I personally am looking for with my manuscript wish list, I am very open in children's. I do, you know, picture books by author illustrators, so it has to come with illustrations. Middle grade and YA. I love fantasy. I love romance. I love contemporary. Anything feel good, heartfelt, middle grade. And then I do adult fiction that leans more commercial in women's fiction, romance, historical fiction, sci-fi, and fantasy, and then some select nonfiction, mostly in the narrative space, and you know, anything similar to what Sue is doing. I'm open to it.
And if you don't mind, Sam just mentioned that there's a great new agent that's working at her agency, Kara Roeder, who is looking for new clients. Could you mention what Kara's looking for?
Yeah, so Kara actually specializes in nonfiction specifically, and I know there are probably a lot of nonfiction writers here. And she recently joined our agency from Chicago Review Press. She's been an editor for a number of years. Before that, she was like at Macmillan, I think. And now she's actively acquiring, and she does a broad range. She's looking for narrative nonfiction, memoir. She, I think, would be open to science-based projects, parenting, self-help, spirituality. So she's like a great person at our agency. The timing is right if you have a project ready to go.
Okay, so here's my question. First of all, you'll have to give us the contact information. Maybe you can type it into the Q&A.
Or people can email me at profsue123@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to share information.
Right. So just because you find an agent, because I know I've written to the New York Times a lot. Sometimes I hear back, sometimes you don't hear anything back. So just because you find an agent doesn't mean that you're going to hear back from them, correct? Okay.
Sam? Oh, looks like she froze.
She likes froze.
Yeah, by the way, a lot of agents and editors say to people that they will only contact you if they're interested. So that happens. Yeah, let's see. I'll email Sam and say, do you want to sign in again?
Okay.
Hang on. Samantha, okay. You froze, want to sign in again. Yeah, so just because you find an editor or an agent that you're interested in, it doesn't mean they're necessarily going to respond to you. But by the way, David, there's a lot of things that I teach my students that's in all my secrets are in Book Bible and Byline Bible. There's a lot of trick ways that one could make it 1,000,000 times more likely that an agent is going to call you back or that an editor is going to get in touch with you. There's many, many ways. I mean, I'll just give you one. One is a lot of people say to me, oh, I'm trying to find an agent for my book project and it's too hard and they never get back to me. And so I make a suggestion that I talk about a lot in my classes and in Byline Bible, and Book Bible, which is sell a short piece, a really great short piece to a splashy newspaper or magazine. And at the bottom of it say, that you're working on a book project. So some people say to me, well, that's too hard. And I'm like, well, you know what? If you can't sell a short piece, how are you going to sell a book? And it's really not that hard. And an op-ed piece could be 600 words, which is 2 pages. And a good essay could be 3 pages. And it makes it not only much more likely that an agent or editor will get back in touch with you if you include the link in your pitch to them. But the other thing that you'll see is that editors and agents will contact you. If you say that you're working on a book and you have a great piece that's about the book. And I've had out of students who've sold 700 books in the last 10 years, I would say 80% of them started with a short piece, and almost all of them got editor and agent interest based on a short piece that went viral or that people saw. So that's just one of many tricks that'll just make it much more likely that you could land a literary agent.
So Samantha, one of our listeners just says that Thompson's literary website has been hacked. I just tried twice to view the agent bios. So
the website shouldn't have been hacked, but there's a message that pops up now that warns people because someone was impersonating our agents and trying to solicit money. You should be able to click away from that pop-up and see the full website.
Okay.
Uh,
So Susan answered your question, but so my question was, let's say you write to an agent, you don't hear back. Do you follow up? Do you try and call them, or you just say, okay?
Yeah, do you like follow up, Sam? Do you mind a follow up?
I don't mind a follow-up. Don't call me. But you can follow up on however you queried that agent. If it was an email query, you can follow up there, or if it's on Query Manager, which is what I use, you can send a message through that system. I would give it 12 weeks before you follow up. But after that, it's perfectly acceptable to check in, make sure you didn't get lost, bump yourself back up to the top of the pile.
Sam, have you ever had a scenario where somebody publishes something splashy and that attracts you? I know Meg's client, Banning Lion, did that splashy piece in the Washington Post and immediately was able to get a great deal from Penguin on his book. Have you seen that happen before, where somebody publishes a short piece and it goes viral, or that gets interest from book editors or agents?
Yeah, and especially with Meg, who's another agent at our agency, she is constantly scanning, journals, the New York Times, the New Yorker, just looking for talent. And so that's, like, especially in the nonfiction space, a huge way that agents are taking on clients. In the fiction space, it's a little bit different. People don't tend to publish short pieces before publication.
Well, let me tell you a very happy story. I'll tell you a very happy story. My student, Christina Wyman, she did my first piece in my class, which is write about your most humiliating secret. And her most humiliating secret during the pandemic was that she had cranial problems and surgeries. And so she was the only person in the world that loved wearing a mask. And so she wrote this interesting piece for the Washington Post about how it's the first time she's ever felt confident going out. And at the bottom, she said she's working on a kid's book. And a former student of mine who's a big kids book editor saw it, wanted it, bought it. Jawbreaker is not only out and has gotten like rave reviews, she's already sold her second book. So, and I've seen that happen, so that even if it's fiction, if the piece that you're writing has a connection to the subject matter, it still sometimes is a way to bring in editors and agents. And talking about nonfiction, Sam recommended me to do a co-authored book called American Shield. And I wasn't sure if it was going to be able to sell because there were so many January 6th books out there. And we did a piece for the New York Times called I Was Betrayed by President Trump, by my co-author, Aquilino Gonell. And we were on Zoom with like great editors the next day, and one of them bought it. So I would say, David, if you send your stuff to an agent, I mean, look what Sam said, it could take 12 weeks. In that 12 weeks, there's nothing smarter you could do than trying to get published in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, New Yorker, New York Magazine, Washington Post, because it's so visible that 1 million people are going to see it. And if you happen to say at the bottom that you're working on a short piece, it's just a great shortcut to make things happen faster, I think.
Yeah, a platform never hurts. Like, the more you can do to build up your presence online and get pieces published, it never hurts at all. It's very, very important for nonfiction and less important for fiction. So like, if I find an author in my inbox who has never published a thing and they're writing a YA, then I don't care and I would still take them on. But, when I think about nonfiction, I'm thinking, are they expert in this? Have they written on the topic? And it's very important to have that track record.
So, so for people listening, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and we have some. So I want to go to some of the questions. Okay, these were actually submitted by email. Have you worked with authors who have already self-published a book? In relation to this, if an author was interested in possibly working with you or another agent who has already started working with a self-publishing service, can the agent take over, or is this a sticky situation?
I personally am not looking to take on projects that have been previously published, whether that's self-published or not. The only way that I could see that working really well is if the book has done gangbusters, like if it's sold thousands and thousands of copies, and then we could turn around and appeal to a publisher. But once a book is out there and it has an established track record, it's very hard to, go to a publisher and say, well, it only sold 100 copies, but now we think that, you should take a chance on it. And, you know, it's a very hard argument to make. So, you know, I would like to start fresh, or if you're going to send me something you've already self-published, I'd like to see it be significantly revised, reformatted, rethought. Yeah, in terms of already working with a self-publishing service, definitely you'd want to pull your project before you're approaching agents. But yeah, it's a very difficult thing to accomplish.
On the other hand, let me be optimistic and let me say that I know quite a few people who have self-published an earlier project and then they've written another project and the other project finds a big publisher. So just because you've written one project that either didn't do well or only had a small publisher or you self-published, it doesn't disqualify you in any way from doing another project. And also, you know, I've been in therapy a long time and I highly recommend all writers try it, but it's not like you have one book. You think you only have one book, but like I'm on book 19. It's like you don't only have one book, you just have to expand your mind a little bit. So even if you spent too much time on one book, it doesn't mean if you try a new project or you try a new genre, you might have much more luck in that. And I'll just tell you really very quick story was that I tried to write a novel for like 7 years. I kept trying to publish it and everyone liked it and nobody was buying it. And I was going crazy and it was really depressing. And finally I showed it to a really honest mentor. And I said, what the hell's wrong with this? Tell me. And it was about two women who switched lives based on my sister-in-law. And she said, okay, you have no imagination whatsoever. Stop writing fiction. And number two, sister-in-laws is really boring. Write about sex. And number three, you write better about people you love. So I said, so no one's going to buy it. She said, put it away, try something else. So I went home swearing, you're stupid, you don't know what you're talking about, totally upset, pissed off. Next day came up with an idea, 5 Men Who Broke My Heart, which was nonfiction about sex and people I love. Within 6 months, it sold to Random House. Paramount Pictures bought it. I had 7 foreign editions. It led to 5 other nonfiction books. She was totally right. And after that, I went back and learned how to write fiction better. And I did sell that book. But so I'm just saying that, you know, you think you're married to one project, but sometimes if it's self-published or it's not doing well, or you can't get traction on it, switching projects is a really great way to start afresh.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely, if you self-publish your first project, but you have a fresh new project that no one's ever seen, I would absolutely be willing to review it.
So, good question I have is that if you are writing a book, should you someone says, should I complete it before I send it to the agent, or should I try and speak to the agent first? I mean, my guess is that I don't want to spend, you know, write 1,000 pages. The agent says, forget about it, you know, so.
Yeah, it depends on what you're writing. So if you're writing nonfiction, you often don't have to have a completed manuscript. You can sell it on a proposal. And so, you know, a proposal is typically 50 pages. It has info about the author, info about the market, competitive titles and overview, and then a chapter outlines and sample chapters. And typically that would be enough to entice an agent in the nonfiction space, unless you're writing memoir, which can kind of go either way, because often memoir is based on the quality of the writing as opposed to the platform of the author. And so we really would need to see how the story resolves itself and would need the full manuscript. But that it can go either way. So you can try agents with a proposal for memoir, and if that's not working, you could try the full manuscript. But for fiction, it's always the full manuscript. So you really do have to labor over those pages before you send it out to an agent.
And I will just add that, again, David, if you are impatient and you think, you know, a book proposal, a nonfiction book proposal could be 100 pages and could take 6 months or a year to really get it right. If you're impatient, publish a short piece. I cannot tell you how many students over the years have published a short piece and have gotten editors and agents who basically almost let the short piece be the proposal, and they wind up selling a book so much faster. And by the way, I've seen it happen with fiction, nonfiction, YA, middle grade, self-help, biography. There's something about, especially if a piece, you know, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Magazine, I don't know whether it's because everyone's a starfucker or because if it goes viral, there's already an audience in it. Or, you know, the joke in Hollywood is that they can only read 900 words, so producers get interested. I cannot tell you how many exciting things can happen with like 900 words, to the point where I say to my students, 3 pages can change your life. Now they have to be damn good 3 pages. By the way, I'm getting some emails saying that the chat is disabled. So does that mean that people should go to the question section, the Q&A section instead of?
The chat is just for the panelists, the panelists.
Okay, so if you're people that are listening, if you can't write in the chat, add your questions in the Q&A, right?
Yes, that's where I would like them to go.
Okay,
Anyways, the chat's in case we have technical problems, that kind of stuff.
okay.
So someone said, for a fiction agent, who would Samantha recommend?
For
fiction.
adult or kid book, adult or kids?
I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry, what is the full question for fiction? Who would I
For a
recommend?
fiction agent, who would you recommend?
Well, me, but I'm closed right now. There are a lot of wonderful fiction agents, but it really depends on the genre. Like, are you writing fictional kids books? I know, a bunch of wonderful agents who do that. I know a bunch who do adults. At my own agency, Kylie Raymond is fantastic. She does upmarket and literary fiction. I'd have to get more specific. I really recommend checking out Manuscript Wishlist and Publishers Marketplace as good spots to start if you're searching for an agent for fiction.
Yeah, and I'll just throw out there that even though I like to help people get published, one of the biggest mistakes I see is someone will say, "Oh, I just finished my novel. Give me the name of all the agents you know." And I'll be like, "Cool. How long have you been working on it?" 6 months. And I'm like, "Okay, has anyone read it?" No. Have you been in an MFA program? No. Have you taken a fiction class? No. Do you have any advanced blurbs? No. Have you used a ghost editor? No. And I'm like, I'm going to tell you, there's no way that this book is ready to send to an agent yet. So what happens is, if somebody wants to email me and tell me where they are with a project, there's a 1,000 things I would recommend before rushing this project that you just finished 30 seconds ago to an agent. And it's the same thing I say to my students doing short pieces. Don't finish something at 3 a.m, decide it's brilliant and send it to the New Yorker. What I do, after years of rejection, the way that I've sold so many books, and I've sold 4 novels and many nonfiction books in different genres, is I complete a project. You need a system of criticism. So I personally have 2 really tough weekly writing groups with brilliant critics. I bring it in, they kill it. I bring in page. After I'm done, I hire a ghost editor to go over it. And I only work with people that are literary agents or book editors because they know the market. I need somebody that knows the market. I pay them to go over my manuscript line by line. I often revise it, go over it again. So by the time I am getting either my full manuscript of fiction or my proposal to Sam or to any of the agents I've worked with, it is so kicked into shape that you could literally open it from a bookstore. You can open it, you can open the page and start reading. And I would say a lot of people make a mistake if they go to agents too quickly and then the agents say no. And then a lot of times you can't try the agent again because they've already said, or you certainly can't try them again on the same project. So I would say if people have questions about agents, email me first before you're rushing to send a project. And there's really a checklist I could go through to see whether you're ready to send to an agent. And the chances are, if you've finished a project and no one's read it, it hasn't been ghost edited, you're not in an MFA program, you don't have advanced blurbs from somebody who's published something, and you haven't published an excerpt of it, chances are you're not ready to go to agents yet. And it's just going to be so frustrating because you could waste 6 months or a year getting no's, whereas if you took 3 weeks to do the right thing to figure out how to make it more ready, you'd have more chances. And by the way, Sam, one of my students just asked if she got a no from someone at an agency for her book project, could she try someone else at the agency, at your agency, or should we say you should wait until you have another project?
Yes, you can try someone else at my agency, although we all sort of specialize. There's not as much overlap. But like when I used to work at Writer's House, there was no problem. Like you couldn't query 2 agents at the same time, but if the first agent rejected, you could send it to the second one. And there are like 20 agents at that agency. So there are a lot of people to try.
On the other hand, I mean, my first project was rejected 30 agents, 30 editors, and then it sold. But I will say I was listening to the feedback that I was getting and I kept revising it. And I did use a ghost editor. So I would say if you're sending out a project and you're getting a lot of rejections, do something different. And again, it could be as stupid as publish 3 pages of it and see if you get response that way, or use a different ghost editor, or maybe your title and subtitles suck. There's a lot of things that could be wrong with a manuscript. And it's one of the things I do in my classes and also with ghost editors. If you're open for criticism, I would say out of all my books, I have never started a book that ended the same way it started. So every single book that I've started it one way. Like I said, first idea was, oh, I'm going to write, I have this great novel. No imagination whatsoever, put it away for 8 years, wrote a nonfiction book first. There was one memoir that started a memoir, wound up a self-help book because it was too hard to sell. Another memoir, started a memoir, ended up a comic novel. And the trick, I think I write about this in Book Bible, I call it genre fluidity. So the trick is to find people you trust who will tell you the truth. And that could be, you know, Sam does ghost editing. It could be an agent. It could be a book editor. It could be a ghost editor. Could be someone who's written in the same genre, a professor, somebody you trust. Get feedback, listen to the feedback. And if you're not having luck selling it, be willing to compromise and maybe be willing to either consider a different genre or consider, you know, what's the criticism you're hearing and revise. Because, you know, so again, I have now, I'm on project 19 and every single project started out something else. And because I had a lot of therapy and I had great criticism, I was able, because I thought, what's my goal? And my goal wasn't, I want to be the great American novelist. My goal was, I want to make a living as a writer in the big city and I want to publish books. But because I was willing to compromise, I wound up having a really great nonfiction career before I was able to publish a novel. But it took listening to criticism and being willing to compromise before that happened.
And I will just like,
I never heard of a ghost editor until I took your course. And
I just want to add one last.
There's a lot of names for them. They're also called developmental editors, book doctors. Yeah, so there's a lot of different names for them. But by the way, I didn't know about it either. And I tried to sell a book for 7 years and couldn't. And then a quick story is I was complaining to my shrink that this is never going to happen. And I was just so depressed. And I happened to mention that I was jealous of, I had 2 colleagues who both sold books, one a big nonfiction, one a fiction, like that week. And I was just like enraged and jealous and envious. And how can they do it? And I can't. So he said, why don't you take one out to lunch? Why not, you know, take one out to lunch or dinner or drinks and ask them advice. So I said, okay. So I took Larry out to lunch and he told me about his project. And I said, I've been trying to sell project for years, having no luck. He said, okay, there's this great ghost editor named Sally. Don't tell anyone I'm telling you. Here's her phone number. She was the one who kicked my nonfiction manuscript into shape. Call her.
What is a ghost editor?
A ghost editor kicks your manuscript into shape. You pay them, you hire them to fix your book. She was a former Doubleday editor who she fixed his project. Go out to dinner with my friend Yona, who just sold a big novel. And I told her, you know, I haven't had luck in 7 years. And she says, okay, this is just between us, but there's this amazing ghost editor named Sally I used to help me kick my novel into shape. And she gave me her info, same person. But then I found out she was very expensive. So I had a 220-page memoir that I wasn't selling and I was upset. So I asked her and it would be, I think she quoted me $2,200 to line edit. And I said to my agency, I can't afford that. That's ridiculous. He said, how stupid are you? You haven't sold a book for 7 years. You're totally depressed. You're paying me money to be your therapist. You have 2 people you know really well who have paid this woman who was a Doubleday editor for 20 years, teach another class, do something else to make money. So I did it. So I spent altogether, I think it was $2,500 and my first advance was $50,000. So a ghost editor is somebody who you can hire behind the scenes who will kick your book into shape, but you can't just go to anybody on the internet. I think you go to a literary agent or a book editor. A lot of them do it on the side, or a former literary agent or book editor who know the market. And if anybody emails me, I have a roster of people I use and I've used them myself. So I know they're fantastic. But to me, that makes a huge difference, especially it's different if you've been in an MFA program, if you're in a writing workshop with people who published, you know, similar books. But a lot of people are just like sitting alone, writing a manuscript, and then they think they're finished. And they've gotten no feedback no professional feedback. So I think you need professional.
One thing I always say is, I have a master's in creative writing. There was from Johns Hopkins, which is, you only accept 30 students a year. They don't teach you anything about the business of writing.
Right.
I mean, in law school, people go to law school and then they have to study for the bar in their state because they're taught nothing about anything practical. They're taught about the Constitution. And that's why I think, your course is valuable. And also, these kind of seminars is that you kind of learn that you can be a great writer, but you don't know, how do you find an agent? Should I be signing this contract? these kinds of things. And what do you do if you don't get paid? Things like that. What do you do if it gets dropped? So there's a lot of practical things to it. As noble as a profession writing is, there are things. So someone said, is a platform as important for personal narratives, a memoir, as it is for narrative nonfiction?
Sam?
Sam?
Not as important, no. But I will say that you have to have a really big hook, and your writing has to be amazing. Because memoir is a very crowded space. So, what sets your story apart? What is like the saleable element to it? And then, you have to wow them with your writing. Platform in memoir is great, and I highly recommend doing what Sue suggests and getting a few pieces on the topic published so that you are establishing a platform. But it's not as important as, a celebrity memoir or a piece of science writing where you really need to establish yourself as an expert on the topic.
I'll add a joke, which is that I have 4 addiction books out. So my platform for all my addiction books, a couple of them from Random House, my platform is that I was a chain smoker, a pothead, and an alcoholic, and a druggie, and a food addict. And that's a good platform if you're writing an addiction book. And I have quite a few former students who've written addiction books, including Kat Marnell, who did an amazing big 6-figure Simon & Schuster, how to murder your life. Quite a few people who've done addiction books. I will say almost everyone that I know who did get a big memoir deal did start it with a short piece. And I almost all my books, I started with a short piece. In fact, Lighting Up How I Stopped Smoking, Drinking, and Everything Else I Loved in Life Except Sex started with 2 pieces, one in the Observer that went viral and one in the New York Times Magazine. And so I will say it's still the best way to start. And what's interesting is people get hung up on platform, but the truth is one short piece, it could be your platform. So just for example, my former student, Tiffany Drayton, wrote an amazing piece called Black American Refugee in the New York Times opinion section that went viral during George Floyd. And Susan Gollum wound up selling her book to Viking. That I can't tell you how often that happens. I mean, I don't think I've ever had a class where that doesn't happen, where somebody publishes a great piece and then they get literary agents and editors calling them. So it's not as hard to, I mean, my book is how to get published in 5 weeks. So it doesn't take that long to do. And actually in the Byline Bible, I list 27 short pieces that led to literary agents and books. And there's been so many more since I wrote that.
So someone, Susan says, I'm writing a book entitled A Male Gynecologist Goes Through Menopause.
Jerry.
Right. And how important is my social media presence in selling to a publisher?
Well, by the way, he did a great piece. He did a fantastic piece for the Washington Post. But
Yeah.
Sam, what do you think about social media?
See, in this case, I don't think social media is as important in terms of platform. Because I think getting the piece published is establishing that people are interested in the topic and that there is an audience for it. So if you can get your pieces published, even if you only have a couple social media followers, I think that that's okay. And you're an expert because you're the gynecologist, and that is a great title also, and very unique topic. So you have a hook, you have an established track record of having people interested in your topic, and that should be enough.
I'll just throw out, by the way, if somebody is not a writer, because Jerry, has been an acclaimed doctor for a lot of years, you also have other options, which is you can hire a ghost editor. By the way, you can hire a ghost writer, someone who spent, you've spent 50 years being a doctor, they've spent 50 years being a writer. I also do a thing where I co-author books. So for example, Sam just put together a fantastic project, American Shield, which was with Aquilino Gonell, who is a police officer. He's a veteran and a police officer, and he had an amazing story to tell with January 6th, but he's not a writer and English wasn't his first language. And Sam also sold my book with Kenan Trebincevic. Again, he had a great story to tell, which is he was a Bosnian war survivor, Bosnian Muslim war survivor, but he's a physical therapist. English wasn't his first language. So quite often there are a lot of well-known people or people in different fields who then work with either a ghostwriter or a co-author who can tell their story. So that, that happens very often. So if you're having trouble getting traction and you're not a writer, you haven't spent a lot of decades writing, you might want to consider, is there a ghost writer, or is there a co-writer who might be able to help you?
I've co-written a lot of books because doctors are not good writers. They think they are, but they're not.
And do you do it as a ghost, David, or do you have your name on it?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah. It depends on, sometimes it's their preference or the agent's preference. When submitting a piece to New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, etc., is there any advantage, disadvantage of sending it directly to the editor of the page in question? Or is it just effective to use a general submission form? And especially if it's breaking news.
No, it never, there's never a benefit of sending it to a general form, ever,
Right.
ever. So the trick is, and by the way, part of the reason in my 5-week classes, I have 16 editors who zoom in is because, maybe the tricky part is which editor do I send which piece to, and how do I get their email address, and how do I know what their expertise is, which is why every single term, I have so many different editors who zoom in and we pick their brain and they say, what section are you and how do you want yours? Every single editor wants it differently.
Right.
Some want a pitch, some want a proposal, some want the full piece, some want it in a submittable, some want it attached and pasted below. And there's no place to find that out except for meeting the editors and listening or talking to somebody who has written for them. But I never have, actually, there's only one time in my life where it was beneficial, and that was I checked an editor at the Washington Post who I work with, who no longer was doing a relationship column. And she told me the quickest way to get 20 editors' eyeballs on it would be to try the Washington Post everything. But I did it using her name because I'd worked with her before, and then somebody bought it quickly. But in general, I always get the name of the editor and the email and make sure it's the right section. I find that extremely important. And in the same way as Sam in Manuscript Wishlist describes exactly what genre she wants, you never just go to an agent and say, here, take my book. You always make sure that they, not only that they want the kind of book that you're doing, but, are they open for submissions? How do they want you to submit to them? Some agents only want 10 pages. Some want the first page of your book pasted in an email. Some want the entire proposal. So every single agent is different. So I think doing your homework with agents and editors is really important.
Well, the other thing is that if it's a breaking news story, it's usually not going to be assigned to a freelance,
Well, it depends. If you're breaking a news story in an op-ed, you absolutely can do that. And I have done that before, and you have to have the name of the right editor and you just send it in. And by the way, I also have students who've broken first person stories, for example, a Me Too story, or something that they were like, the police officer, for example, where they were right emotionally involved with it. So you're talking a breaking story that it tends not to be third person reported, but it's either opinionated or first person essay. You can absolutely break news in one of those. But but knowing the right editor, I think, is really important.
So the other question is, like, writing a memoir, like, okay, the 5 guys who broke your heart.
5 men who broke.
5 men who broke your heart. Okay. So do you have to get their permission in order to talk about them, or do you?
No, I would say if you're writing a short piece, it's a little more complicated. So for example, a lot of my students have launched books from Modern Loves, from New York Times Modern Loves. I think I have like 75 students who've broken into that column, and I think 6 or 7 led to books and 2 got in the TV show for $5,000 extra. But if you're doing a Modern Love, if there's anything that could be litigious, or if you're trashing somebody in a way where you could tell who the person is, a lot of times Modern Love will show the piece to the subject, and if they threaten to sue, or if they hate it, or if they argue that it's not true, they won't run it. In a memoir, it's different. I will say I did have a great Random House lawyer who went over everything and explained to me that with nonfiction, for somebody to sue and win, they would have to prove you lied with malice intended or disregard of truth and show damages. So there are a lot of ways to get around that. So for example, this is stupid, but for 5 men who broke my heart. So at the beginning, I focused on how handsome and wonderful they were. And I even have a part I explain in a piece that I wrote called Avoid the Poison Pen. So if you say great things about someone, not only are they less likely to sue, but also it's harder to prove malice. So if you're writing about a relationship, at least talk about what you fell in love with at the beginning, or say what's great about them, and that could get you out of trouble. So that's one way around it. Also, you could just obscure certain facts. So I did do a Modern Love where I did not want the ex to be called. So what I did was aside from saying how handsome he was when I first met him, I took out his name, I took out his profession, I took out what city he was in. So there was really there were not recognizable characteristics. And so that's how I got out of it. But a lot of times you can, if you're careful, I mean, you can't, nobody wants revenge porn. So you can't really just write about, you know, how sucky your ex is or how sucky your ex-boss is or your mother or your father. So usually it has to be more nuanced and more literary than that anyway. But there are definitely ways to do that. And I help my students all the time so that you don't, you know, you don't get in trouble legally, and editors will, you know, will let you publish it without showing the other person.
So what about if you're writing about a child of yours? I mean, you should probably run it by them.
Most newspaper magazine editors that I work with will ask a parent, especially if the kid is over 12 or 13, do you have permission to write this story? And if they're younger, it's questionable, you know, and it comes up, there's a lot of questions about it, you know, so you definitely, especially if it's, for example, if you're writing about your kid being gay or trans or, you know, a medical issue or whatever, each editor has to decide, you know, based on their own discretion, whether it's appropriate. But I will say that it definitely makes it harder if you're writing anything negative or provocative or controversial about your child and they haven't given you permission. And also, how much can a 12 or 13-year-old give you permission? So that's an issue sometimes.
Yeah. So someone write, other than meeting people in your class, any tips on finding great people to form a writers group?
Well, I will say that tons of spin-off groups have happened in class. So I would say any writing class that you're in, if you meet someone that you admire, if you admire their work or you think they're a good critic, that's a great way to start. Also, I'm in a lot of Facebook groups. I'm in a lot of social media groups. So what's great about being in these writer groups is that you can see people's writing, you can see their criticism, you can see how they're answering questions. And so if there's anybody who you like, and by the way, quite often they post, hey, I'm doing an online writing group, or hey, it's in New York, do you want to do a writing group? So that's a way to do it. At the new school in NYU, everybody was doing it with their classmates. So you might, if you've taken writing classes in general, you might want to see if there's anyone that you admire. Yeah.
So here's a question that you asked. You know, you gave me some questions, you know, suggested questions, but what's the biggest mistake new writers make? You kind of said that a little bit.
Samantha, what do you think? What's the biggest mistake that you're seeing writers make?
I definitely agree with you that it's sending work before it's ready to be seen by an agent or editor. That's a really big one. Another one I feel like is not acting professionally. When you're approaching an agent, I know you're an artist and it's your art and you feel very passionately and personally about it, but you're entering into a professional relationship. And so you should approach this as you would any type of situation in your day job, and, you know, treat them with respect, and not cross boundaries and not waste their time.
Yeah, and I would say, David, that just, you know, just to agree with Samantha, there's a lot of ways, there's a lot of things that you could do to make it more likely that you will get published before you rush to an editor or an agent. So again, I mean, I'd say 50% of the people in my classes during 5 weeks get published. I've had classes where 90% of the people get published. Why? Because I'm a really tough critic and I'm looking at everything that people write before it goes out. Fellow students can be really smart and helpful. I'm having the editors and agents, Sam zooms into my book class. I have editors and agents zoom in and answer questions and say, this is what I want, this is what I don't want. And then people are revising, getting really, really good notes. So by the time they're trying an editor, they understand, or an agent, they really have done a lot of research. They've done their homework. So I would say I've never seen, you know, it's very, very rare that somebody, you could sit in your room and write a book and then just send it out and it's going to get published. And it's actually kind of rare with short pieces too. I will say that I put as much information as I possibly could in Byline Bible and Book Bible. So I have had people who've read the books and said, oh my God, it worked. Like I did everything you said and I got in the Washington Post. Here's my clip. So I will say, at least there are really good writing books out there that give very specific information. So at the least, if you can't take a class and you don't have any feedback and you can't afford a ghost editor, at least the books are like, you know, what, $20 or less. And if anybody ever emails me and says I'm broke and I can't afford it, I would, you know, give them a computer version of it. So at least do enough research so that, you know, that it's an educated guess and that you're going through a checkbox before you're rushing to an editor or an agent.
Right. Here's a question. What about working with Medium or other writers outlets? And I just wanted to say a brief word because I have published a few things on Medium. I've been lucky enough to get grants. This summer I got a grant to go to Norway. And when you get a grant, they somehow think that you're biased and you can't really write objectively about what you did. So you can't write for major publications like New York Times or Scientific American. I think that's because travel writers kind of ruined it for us because, you know, if they give bad reviews to places, they don't get invited to go on junkets. I went to a conference on e-cigarettes, and it was in Copenhagen. And because I had a grant from the Danish Ministry of Science to go to Copenhagen, no major outlet would touch that. I went to the exact same subject, the exact same panelists at a Washington, D.C. Conference, and I wrote it up for Scientific American. So to me, it's kind of a strange thing. But what do you think about sometimes you?
Well, I just want to throw something out there. I do not recommend people give away their work for free. So
Okay.
whether it's Medium, whether it's, I don't even think Substack is such, I mean, I know that there's some people that make money on Substack, but
Right.
the minute I hear blog, Substack, newsletter, Medium, don't give it away for free, because what happens is once it's out there and you posted it, nobody's going to buy it, especially the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. They do not want material that's already been published. So my feeling is, especially if you think you have something great, hold off, wait until it's timely, revise it, get help doing it. I mean, there's ghost editors, there's classes. I do one-shot seminars. You could go to a colleague who's written something. So really try to sell it first. Now, by the way, if you have something great and it's been rejected 22 times, okay, then I think I understand why you would put it on Medium, put it on Substack, put it on your blog, put it on Facebook. But if you just start that way, it's like you're acting as if you've been rejected 50 times before you've even given it a shot. And I cannot tell you how many students of mine, their very first clip is in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, New York Magazine. Why? Because they had a great story and all they needed to do was get a little bit of help to figure out how to pitch it. So I would say, don't give it away for free at first. And the same with self-publishing, don't give it away for free. If you've tried everything in the world and you love your piece or you love your book and then nobody's buying it, then you should consider it. But don't, start off, what if it works? Start off with start off with mainstream publishing.
Well, I just want to stress that your course that you teach, it's not only just for people who want to publish books, it's also for people who want to get published in the New York Times or Scientific American.
Yeah, well, so my pitch class, which actually I'm doing another one starting Wednesday. So my pitch class, it's a 5-week online class where I bring in, it's live regular class where I bring in, this term I'm bringing in 16 different editors, all my favorite editors who buy work from me and my students. And we work on pitches and we try to figure out what we should pitch to each specific editor. So I get people of all ages. So I've had literally from age 14, somebody who helped, he could publish so much, it helped him get a free ride to an Ivy League school for 4 years because he had so many great publications. And I also had somebody get a free ride to graduate school based on clips. But I get people that are just starting out, all ages, not only all over the country, all over the world now on Zoom. And what's really interesting is that I get a lot of book authors who want to sell their books, but this happened with Banning Lyon, who I met through Meg Thompson. A lot of editors and agents are sending me their clients because they have a proposal or a book that's either not selling or even one that's selling, but they don't necessarily know how to place short pieces. And the best thing that one could do once you have a book that you want to get published, or even if it's getting published, is learn how to do short pieces, because you're basically getting paid to write your own book publicity at every stage. So yeah, so it's a really interesting mix. And Jerry, who is a doctor, I've had doctors and lawyers take the class. So yeah, so it's a very fun class. And my favorite part is that on Zoom, I can bring in, I mean, we had one class where I had the New York Times op-ed editor, the Washington Post op-ed editor, and the LA Times op-ed in one Zoom. So you really get a sense of who's out there and what they're buying and what they're paying and how many words and how to pitch them. And I do a how to sell your book class, and Sam Zoomed in. And actually, I think, is that how you met Orlando?
Yeah, that is how I met Orlando. He had talked about his project, and he had actually talked about it in front of a HarperCollins editor, and then that HarperCollins editor ended up passing it along to someone else on her team and bought the book. And so yeah, your classes are very helpful for making connections and for learning so much about the industry.
Yeah,
Is
because
it,
pick the brains of editors and agents to figure out what they're looking for.
okay, is it ethical to use a ghostwriter without disclosing it?
There's a difference between a ghost writer and a ghost editor. I think if you're using a ghost writer, you disclose it. I mean, I have a line like, I never lie to my agent or my shrink, you know, so yes, you should absolutely tell your agent and your book editor if you're going to use a ghost writer because you didn't write it. I think a ghost editing is different because a ghost editing is just, it's like taking a class or a writing group or something. So I don't necessarily, I never told my agents and editors that I was using a ghost editor because it was, I wrote the thing, I got notes, and then I rewrote it. So I don't think a ghost editor, you have to disclose it, but a ghost writer, I think you do. What do you think, Sam?
I agree 100%. I think, you know, if someone else is writing it, then your agent should know. But if you're getting feedback and then you're applying the feedback in your own way, like, you know, just, we don't need to know that. You can say it's been professionally edited and that won't help or harm you either way. But yeah, editing, we don't need to know.
Okay, someone asked about titles. So is there a secret to coming up with a good title?
What do you think, Sam?
I'm really bad at it. It should be something recognizable. You know, I get a lot of fantasy submissions where it's like made up words that are sort of hard to remember or understand. It should be a concept we understand in our world. It should be something easy to remember. If it has a million words in it, like, then it's very hard to repeat. I'm not going to remember it. And so I would say, you know, common phrases, something very catchy. But Sue is like I think the master at coming up with good titles.
Thank you. Well, you know, I studied poetry, so the alliterations I like, and also I've written a lot of humor. So lighting up, how I stopped smoking, drinking, and everything else I loved in life except sex. Although I think my agent maybe helped me at the time, Elizabeth Kaplan helped me with that one. But 5 Men Who Broke My Heart, I had people who said the title alone, they just wanted to read the book. So I like it if I know if I know something of what the book is going to be about. So like the Forgiveness Tour, How to Find the Perfect Apology, or so we did American Shield, the immigrant sergeant who defended democracy. I like it with nonfiction. I think it has to be catchy, but I also want to know what it's about. And I think with fiction, it just has to be evocative. So my fiction books are called Overexposed. I just love that word. And speed shrinking, I invented sort of a weird phrase that people didn't know. And then World in Between, they actually had us change our title. It was the book
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
It was called
It was Losing Home.
It was called Losing Home, and it's a middle grade book. It was with Kennan, a middle grade book about a Bosnian Muslim war survivor. And it was for ages 8 to 12 is middle grade. And they said losing home was too negative a concept for a child, for an 8 to 12-year-old. It was so negative that it wouldn't make them want to read the book. It would repel them. So we came up with a lot of titles. So World in Between, because he was leaving Bosnia, but he wasn't acclimated to America. So we came up with that title.
Yeah, your title should say something. It should say something about your book, and it shouldn't be hard to remember. But don't be married to your title because it's probably going to change.
Yeah,
for newspapers and magazines, that you don't come up with a title. They do it themselves.
Oh, not only do they do that, it's always, you know, I had one title. I wrote a piece called Second Chance, and it was about selling back orange, green, and yellow clothes that my mother would send me because I only wanted black. And there was a secondhand store called Second Chance, which is a great title because it's double entendre. The New York Times editor, I swear to God, they called it Thanks Mom, comma, Thanks Mom, instead of Second Chance. So I paid a web designer to redo a whole JPEG that put Second Chance because I was too embarrassed to share it. And I had another recently I wrote a book on, you know, how to quit addictions, and the editor changed it to say how to quit weed, and then in parentheses and other toxic habits, because I guess everybody's obsessed with weed. If I tell you, I got so many comments where people were totally pissed off because they said, weed is not toxic. I love it. It's making me happy. And they also, you know, it was really negative. And I felt like saying, I think I did, you're not supposed to answer, but I answered. I'm like, writers don't write their own headlines. Stop yelling at me, you know? But yeah, you can't control your own headlines. Once in a while, I've complained so badly that they'll change it a little bit, but sometimes I'll tell one other funny clickbait story. So a student of mine once wrote a piece called, first piece he ever published, it was "My Mother Saved My Balls." And it was, he had testicular cancer, and he went to a doctor where he was in college, and the doctor was gonna get rid of one of his testicles, and his Jewish mother drove in and like took him to 25 doctors. And then it turned out there was a different procedure. But so it was his first clip, and we celebrated. Cut to 7 years later, he's trying to get a job on Wall Street. And every time you Google him, the first thing that comes up is "My mother saved my balls." So, it was really hard to get it. What we did was we got the editor to change the name. He couldn't change the title, but he changed the name, so at least it wasn't associated with him. But, yeah, a lot of times you don't control your own titles.
All right, so we have a few minutes. Any final words?
Sam, what advice would you give to people who want to work with you or your agency?
Have a really strong query letter and know what your hook is and how to pitch your book. Know how to talk about your book. When I'm looking at query letters, I want someone who's telling me what's wonderful about their project, has really good, strong comps, they know the market. If you're writing fiction, I want to know about your characters' goals, obstacles, and stakes. And even in a memoir or narrative, I would want to know those things as well: goals, obstacles, stakes, basically the arc of the story that you're telling. And yeah, just make sure that you have all of those points highlighted and that you're pointing out what's unique about your project and why you're the best person to be writing it.
Yeah, and I would say one of the things that I've learned over the years is sometimes if a project isn't working or you're not having luck or things aren't going your way, you just need one person who's a change agent who can help you. So that could be a teacher, it could be a shrink, it could be a mentor, it could be an agent, it could be a colleague from your writing group. But I would say that seek help. You know, you can't you're sitting on your computer and you're not open to criticism. You know, it's going to be hard to change or to make the leap. And I would definitely say, I mean, the thing that's helped me the most is taking classes, being open to criticism. You know, even though we all think we're brilliant and we all think everything we write is great, but whether it's using Sam as a ghost editor, she's still open right now for the next couple of weeks. If anybody needs a ghost editor, she's brilliant editor. She's helped a lot of my students. But I could recommend, if people email me, I could recommend others or take a class. Or, by the way, you know, I love these writing programs. I love ghost editors. I could recommend, if you email me and tell me what your project is. I have one ghost editor that's only $300 for books, and she was an editor at Skyhorse where I did my project. So it doesn't have to be astronomical, but I would say make sure that you're getting criticism from somebody who's going to tell you the truth and who's going to give you a good direction. And if there's people in your life who are going to tell you, "Oh, this is so brilliant," ask somebody else, because you need criticism. And again, at least check out Byline Bible or Book Bible so that you understand the basics, because I know that people, you know, I like when people get excited and they want to publish stuff and they think that they have, you know, they think that they're ready, but sometimes they miss really obvious things. Just for an example, with a short piece, the biggest mistake that I think people don't know is they write whatever the hell they want to write, and they don't realize that if you put a timely lead, there's a billion times more likely that an editor is going to buy it. You know, and so I have a whole chapter on what is a timely lead, what makes a piece timely. And it's so fascinating how easy it is to get a timely lead and how yet people don't understand that concept. And so they send op-eds and they send in service pieces and they send in personal essays, but it's just a story that happened in your life. So there's nothing topical. So they don't wind up having luck. And something as stupid as learning how to get a timely lead, which we talk about in class, and all editors in my classes talk about. You know, something that minor can make a huge difference. And by the way, if anybody has any more questions, now that I quit all my other addictions, I'm addicted to email at night. I do all my emails. So profsue123@gmail.com. So feel free to email more questions if you want.
Well, I want to thank you, Susan and Samantha, for being there. And Samantha, I wish you great success and easy delivery.
By the way, she's an amazing agent who has sold 4 books for me in 4 years in all different genres. And I'll tell you, this is a great sign of an agent. American Shield, she came to me. So what's so amazing is if you get a great agent, that you not only bring them projects, they bring you projects.
Okay. So our next topic is going to be artificial intelligence and consciousness. And that's going to be, as long as COVID rates don't go up to 100%, that will be in person in February 7th. And obviously we'll be sending out announcements about that. So Sue, thank you. This is a great way to start off the
Thank you,
year.
David. Thanks, Samantha. Happy
Thank you,
New Year to
Samantha.
everybody.
Happy
Email
New
me,
Year,
I
everybody.
promise. I'm addicted to email. I'll answer all your emails if you email me at night.
She definitely is, yes.
I do. I answer all emails.
Okay.
Okay.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night. Stay
much.
safe.
Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you later. Thanks, Sam.